What would you do if you had exactly one day to find a wife or lose everything your family had ever built? In today's story, a man on the edge of losing his inheritance meets a stranger who agrees to help him, but only if he accepts her conditions first. What starts as a desperate arrangement slowly turns into something neither of them expected. Stay until the end to see how a marriage born from panic becomes a love neither of them saw coming. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Now, let's begin. Nathan Cole had spent the last decade proving himself in Seattle's competitive architecture scene. He worked long nights, chased every contract, and measured his worth in blueprints approved and deadlines met. He hadn't taken a real vacation in years, hadn't called his mother back in weeks, and hadn't thought about his late grandfather's old cabin in the Cascade foothills in longer than he wanted to admit. That changed on a gray Tuesday morning when his grandfather's attorney called and asked him to come in immediately. Sitting across from the lawyer's desk, Nathan learned that his grandfather, Walter Cole, had left him the family property on Lake Serene, 60 acres of forest, a boathouse, and a cabin that had hosted 3 generations of summers. It was the one place Nathan actually loved, the only address that still felt like it belonged to him instead of to a client or a deadline. But there was a condition buried in the will that made his stomach drop. According to Walter's final wishes, Nathan had to be legally married within 24 hours of reading the will, or the land would pass instead to his cousin Marcus, a man who had already made it clear he intended to sell it to a resort developer the moment it became his. The attorney, an older man named Harold Ruiz who had handled Walter's affairs for nearly 30 years, slid a copy of the clause across the desk and watched Nathan read it 3 times as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more forgiving. They didn't. Harold explained gently that Walter had added the condition 2 years earlier, right after Nathan missed Thanksgiving for the 4th year running. It wasn't cruelty, it was a message, written into legal language because Walter hadn't been able to say it any other way while he was alive. Slow down, or lose the thing you claim to love most. Nathan laughed at first, certain it was some kind of joke his grandfather had cooked up before he passed. But Harold's face stayed serious, and the paperwork was real. Walter had always believed Nathan buried himself in work to avoid building a real life, and this was, apparently, his last attempt to force his grandson to slow down and let someone in. Nathan didn't find it funny. He found it terrifying. He had less than a day, no girlfriend, no prospects, and a cousin who was already calling contractors. According to a text, one of the old caretakers had forwarded that very morning, complete with a photo of surveying stakes already driven into the grass near the boathouse. He spent the afternoon making frantic calls, testing every connection he had and getting nowhere. He called an ex-girlfriend he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, who hung up before he finished the sentence. He called a college friend who thought it was a prank and laughed for a full minute before wishing him luck. He even considered briefly and shamefully whether there was a faster, less honest way to satisfy a legal requirement before deciding his grandfather deserved better than a loophole. By early evening, exhausted and out of ideas, he ducked into a small coffeehouse near Pike Place to think, laptop open. Phone pressed to his ear as he explained the situation to his business partner in a hushed, panicked voice. He didn't notice the woman at the next table until she cleared her throat. Her name was Claire Bennett, a pediatric nurse who had just finished a 12-hour shift and stopped in for tea before heading home. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the coffeehouse was small and Nathan wasn't exactly quiet. When he finally hung up and dropped his head into his hands, she asked, carefully, if he was all right. Nathan almost brushed her off with the polite lie people use on strangers, but something about the way she asked, tired eyes and all, made the truth spill out instead. What began as a polite question turned into an hour-long conversation neither of them planned on. Nathan told her everything: the will, the deadline, his cousin, the resort developer, the cabin his grandfather had built with his own hands, the Thanksgivings he had missed, and the ones he wished he could take back. Claire listened without interrupting, occasionally wrapping both hands around her mug the way people do when they are giving someone their full attention. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that her own grandmother had raised her after her parents passed when she was 9, and that she understood, more than most, what it meant to lose the person who built your sense of home. Somewhere near the bottom of her tea, Nathan heard himself say the words out loud for the first time. I need a wife by tomorrow. He expected her to laugh, to make an excuse, to leave. Instead, Claire sat back, studied him for a long moment, and reached into her bag. She pulled out a small notebook, tore a page free, and began writing. When she slid it across the table, she said quietly, "Only if you promise me these things." Nathan unfolded the paper slowly, half expecting a joke. It wasn't. The list was short but specific. She wanted honesty between them, always, even when it was inconvenient. She wanted patience, especially on the nights her job left her raw and exhausted. She wanted him to never treat their arrangement or her as something transactional in front of other people. And the last line stayed with him longest. No matter how important his work became, he had to make time for people who needed him, starting with the children at the hospital's family shelter where she volunteered on weekends. Nathan read it twice. He had expected demands about money, about protection, about an exit plan. Instead, she was asking him to be a better version of himself. He didn't fully understand why a stranger would risk this for him, but he had 11 hours left and nothing to lose. He agreed. They were married the next morning by a courthouse judge who had clearly seen stranger things, with Nathan's assistant and Claire's roommate as the only witnesses. Nathan signed the last of his grandfather's paperwork that same afternoon, and Marcus, furious and blindsided, was left with nothing but a resort brochure he could no longer use. What was supposed to end there did not. Claire made it clear from the start that the marriage on paper didn't mean she expected anything from him beyond what was written on that torn notebook page. But Nathan found himself showing up anyway. He drove her home after night shifts when she was too tired to argue about it. He learned the names of the kids at the family shelter, brought sketchbooks for the ones who liked to draw, and sat on the floor with them while Claire checked in with their parents. He started leaving the office before dark, something his colleagues teased him about relentlessly. Slowly, the cabin on Lake Serene stopped being just a legal victory and started becoming a place they actually went together. Nathan taught Claire how to patch the old dock his grandfather never quite finished repairing. Claire taught Nathan how to sit still on the porch and do nothing at all, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. They argued sometimes about small things, about bigger things, and every time, Nathan kept his promise. He didn't shut down. He didn't disappear into his phone. He stayed in the room and worked it out, exactly like she had asked. Their first real argument came 3 months in over something as small as a missed dinner. Nathan had promised to meet Claire and the shelter kids for a Friday cookout, then let a client call run long, and long became 2 hours late, and 2 hours late became Claire standing alone at a grill with 8 disappointed children asking where her husband was. When Nathan finally arrived, apologizing before he was even out of the car, Claire didn't yell. She simply reminded him, quietly, that the list she had handed him in that coffee house wasn't a formality he could outgrow once the danger passed. Nathan expected to feel defensive. Instead, he felt something closer to shame, and beneath the shame, gratitude that someone cared enough to hold him to it. He rescheduled the client for the following week and never let it happen again. Claire noticed the change before Nathan did. The man who had once measured his days in blueprints and billable hours now measured them in whether he had made it to family dinner, whether he had called the shelter director back, whether he had kept his word. She started looking forward to the sound of his key in the door. She started saving stories from her shift specifically to tell him. She told herself it didn't mean anything more than gratitude, until the night she realized she was disappointed when he texted that he would be late. 6 months after the wedding, with the property fully secured and the arrangement technically no longer necessary, Claire began quietly preparing herself to have the conversation neither of them wanted, the one about ending things cleanly before anyone got hurt. She rehearsed it on her drive to the cabin one Saturday, certain it was the responsible thing to do, but when she arrived, Nathan was already on the dock, waiting, 2 cups of coffee in his hands and an unreadable look on his face. He didn't wait for her to speak first. He told her that he had reread her list more times than he could count, that he used to think it was a strange, almost impossible set of conditions from a stranger who had every reason to walk away instead. Now he understood it differently. It wasn't a test. It was an invitation to become someone worth staying for. He said he had needed a wife to save a piece of land his grandfather loved, but somewhere along the way, without meaning to, he had found something he never expected to need at all. A home. And her. In it. Claire's eyes filled with tears she hadn't planned on. She had walked up that dock ready to end an arrangement. She left it holding his hand instead, The folded, worn notebook page still tucked safely in the drawer of the nightstand back at the cabin. No longer a contract, but a promise both of them had chosen to keep. A year later, on the same dock where Walter Cole once taught a stubborn, restless boy how to cast a fishing line, Nathan and Claire hosted a small gathering for the two of them, her roommate, his assistant, and a handful of kids from the family shelter who had never seen a lake this quiet before. There was no lawyer, no deadline, no condition left to satisfy. Just a man who had learned to make time for what mattered, and a woman who had once handed a stranger a list of promises, never expecting he would keep every single one of them.